When I first walked into that church, I wasn't looking for faith. I was looking for a place to start over. My life had been a mess, bad relationships, broken trust, and a heart that didn't know how to heal. The quiet hum of the choir, the smell of old wood, and the way sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows made me feel safe, like maybe for once I belonged somewhere. But then he walked in. Ethan. He wasn't like anyone I'd met before, confident, kind, and with a calmness that made you want to listen. He was one of the church leaders, the kind of man people respected instantly. And the first time our eyes met, something in me shifted. It was wrong, I told myself. This wasn't the place, not here. But my heart didn't care about rules or timing. Every Sunday I'd find myself arriving earlier, just to see him, just to hear his voice. Just to watch the way his eyes softened when he spoke about forgiveness and love. And maybe that's where it started, because the way he talked about love felt different. Like he wasn't only talking about God, but about something deeper, something human. I never expected what happened next. One evening, after choir practice, he asked me to stay behind. There was a look in his eyes I couldn't read, something between fear and longing. The church was empty, the candles flickering, shadows moving along the walls. He took a step closer, his voice low and uncertain. And in that sacred silence, I realized the truth neither of us could deny. If you've ever found love in the one place you thought it wasn't allowed, stay until the end of this story, because what happened next changed my faith, my heart, and my life forever. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning, and you won't want to miss what came after that night. I had never really believed in second chances. Life, as far as I knew, gave you one shot, and when you messed it up, that was it. But that changed the day I walked into St. Augustine's Church. The building stood quietly at the edge of town, surrounded by tall oak trees that swayed with the wind, their branches casting shadows over the old brick walls. It felt ancient, sacred, almost intimidating. Yet when I stepped inside, I felt peace for the first time in months. I had moved to this small town after losing my job and my partner within the same week. I needed to breathe again, to find something that made sense. A friend had suggested I visit the church, not for religion, but for community. You'll find good people there, he said. I didn't expect to find anyone like Ethan. The first time I saw him, he was talking with a group of teenagers near the altar. His laughter echoed off the high ceilings, genuine and effortless. He wasn't wearing the usual clerical robe, just a white shirt with rolled sleeves and dark jeans. He looked approachable, human. His hair was the color of autumn wheat, and when he smiled, it was the kind that disarmed you completely. When his eyes finally met mine across the room, I froze. He held my gaze for a second longer than normal, enough to make my chest tighten. He gave me a nod, a small, polite gesture, but it felt like more. After the service, he approached me as I was leaving. "Hey," he said, his voice warm. "I don't think I've seen you before." "I'm Ethan." "Daniel," I replied, feeling oddly nervous. "Welcome, Daniel." "I hope we didn't scare you off with all the singing," he laughed softly. "Not at all," I said, smiling despite myself. "Actually, it was kind of nice, peaceful." He nodded, studying me for a moment. "That's what this place is for. You should come again. Maybe join one of our volunteer groups?" Something about his tone made me want to say yes immediately. "Maybe I will," I said, though I had no real intention at that moment. That night I couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something about Ethan that unsettled me in a way that wasn't unpleasant. It was curiosity mixed with fear. I told myself it was just admiration. He was kind, charismatic, and centered, everything I wasn't. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to come back. I'd sit in the last pew, pretending to listen to the sermon, but my attention always drifted toward him. Watching the way he interacted with people, gentle but strong, made me want to know who he really was outside those walls. One evening, after a small group meeting, I was walking toward my car when I heard someone call my name. "Daniel, wait up!" It was Ethan carrying a box of hymn books. He smiled when he reached me. "You forgot your jacket inside." I turned to take it, our hands brushing for half a second. The touch sent a current through me that I wasn't prepared for. I looked at him, and he looked right back, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled again, softer this time. "It's colder than it looks. You should be careful." "Thanks," I said, pulling the jacket over my shoulders, my heart racing for no logical reason. He nodded toward my car. "Drive safe, Daniel, and I'm glad you're coming back. It's nice having you here." That night I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when our hands touched. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But my mind refused to believe that. The next Sunday, he asked me to help organize a charity event the church was planning. I agreed, not because I cared about the event, but because it meant more time around him. We spent hours together setting up tables, checking donation boxes, making lists. I learned he'd been in the town for 5 years, moved there after leaving a big church in the city. "Too much noise," he said. "Too many people pretending to be perfect." I liked that about him, how honest he was, even in a place built on appearances. When the event ended, and everyone had gone home, we stayed behind to clean up. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was loaded. "Ethan," I said finally, my voice low. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, a faint smile on his lips. "Sure. Why did you leave the city, really?" He hesitated, leaning against a table. "Because I was tired of lying," he said simply. "About what?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought he would tell me. But then he just shook his head. "It's complicated." The way he said it made my pulse quicken. I wanted to ask more, to push him, but something in his expression stopped me. It wasn't fear, it was restraint, like he was holding something back. When I got home that night, I knew I was in trouble. I couldn't pretend anymore. Whatever was happening between us wasn't one-sided. There was something there, unspoken, fragile, but real, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to ignore it much longer. That week, I caught myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for a message that never came. I almost convinced myself it was all in my head. But the next Sunday, when I arrived at the church, Ethan was waiting by the door. "Hey," he said quietly, his eyes softer than usual. "Can we talk?" "After the service?" My heart skipped. I nodded. Something was about to change. I could feel it. After that morning, the service felt longer than ever. Every hymn, every verse, every prayer seemed to drag endlessly as I sat there wondering what Ethan wanted to talk about. I couldn't focus on the sermon. His words from earlier, "Can we talk?" kept echoing in my mind like a soft pulse that refused to fade. When the final amen came, I tried to act casual. I stood, shook a few hands, and smiled at the familiar faces around me, but my heart was pounding. Ethan was by the side door, speaking to an older woman, nodding as she talked. When their conversation ended, his eyes met mine across the pews, and he gave me a subtle nod. I followed him outside. We walked behind the church, where the tall trees filtered the sunlight into scattered gold. The air smelled of pine and cold stone. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, what's this about?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair and looked down, almost shy. "You probably noticed I've been distant lately," he said. I frowned. "I didn't think so." "You've been busy, I guess." He shook his head. "That's not it." There was something vulnerable about his tone, something that made me nervous and hopeful at the same time. He looked at me then, his blue eyes steady. "You make me feel things I shouldn't." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I stared at him, speechless. He exhaled and looked away. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I needed to be honest with you." I stepped closer before I could think. "Ethan, what do you mean by that?" He gave a humorless laugh. "You know exactly what I mean, Daniel. But this, whatever this is, it can't happen. I've made promises. I have responsibilities. People look up to me. I wanted to tell him that none of it mattered, that feelings didn't ask for permission, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just said quietly, "You think I don't feel it too?" His eyes widened slightly. "I do," I continued, my voice trembling. Every time I see you, every time you smile at me. I've tried to ignore it, but it's there. It's real," he shook his head slowly. "This isn't supposed to happen. You came here to find peace, not chaos. I found both," I said with a faint smile. "Maybe that's what I needed." He looked torn, like he was fighting himself inside. "Daniel, I don't know what to do with this. I've never—" He stopped mid-sentence and exhaled deeply. "I need time to think." Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked back toward the church. I stood there alone, the wind rustling the leaves around me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every word he'd said, every flicker of emotion that had crossed his face. He'd admitted it, he felt something. But then why did it hurt so much? The next day, I decided to keep my distance. I didn't go to church that week, or the one after. I told myself it was better this way. But deep down, I was just avoiding him, avoiding the truth. One evening, I was walking through the small downtown area when I heard someone call my name. "Daniel!" I turned and saw Ethan jogging toward me, his face flushed from the cold. "You've been avoiding me," he said gently, trying to catch his breath. "I've been busy," I lied. "Don't do that," he said softly. "Don't lie to me," I sighed. "You asked for space. I gave it to you." He looked down, then met my eyes again. "I didn't mean I wanted you gone. I just needed to understand what's happening to me." "And did you?" I asked. He hesitated. "No, if anything, I miss you more." The honesty in his voice made my chest ache. We stood there on the quiet sidewalk, the yellow streetlights flickering above us. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. "Ethan," I said softly, "maybe you don't need to have all the answers. Maybe you just need to stop fighting what's already there." He stepped closer, and I could see the conflict in his eyes, the duty, the fear, the longing. "You make it sound simple," he said, almost whispering. "Sometimes it is," I replied. He smiled, a sad, broken kind of smile. "Oh, you don't know what you're asking me to risk." "Maybe I do," I said, my heart pounding. "But I also know what it feels like to lose something before it even begins." We stood there in silence for what felt like forever. The cold air carried the faint sound of church bells in the distance. Finally, he said, "Come by tomorrow, please. There's something I want to show you." The next day, I drove to the church just before sunset. The place was quiet, almost glowing in the orange light. Ethan was waiting near the side entrance, dressed in his usual rolled-up sleeves and jeans. He led me inside, down a narrow hallway, and into a small room filled with old paintings and books. "This used to be the chapel library," he said. "No one really comes here anymore." I looked around, unsure what to say. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He nodded. "It's where I come to think." Then he turned to me, his expression serious. "Daniel, if I let myself feel this, if I stop pretending, it changes everything for me. My role, my reputation, my faith. I could lose everything." I took a step toward him. "And what happens if you don't?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Then I keep living a lie." I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. Our eyes met, and for the first time I saw it clearly, the struggle, the yearning, the fear. "I don't want to be your secret," I said softly. "But I also don't want to be your regret." He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "You're neither." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm that had been building all week finally broke, rain pattering against the stained glass windows, and as lightning flashed through the room, Ethan's hand brushed mine. It lingered there, just long enough to say everything words couldn't. The rain didn't stop that night. It drummed on the chapel roof like a heartbeat, steady and heavy. Ethan and I stood there in the dim light, our hands still almost touching. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged, alive, humming with everything we hadn't said. When thunder rolled across the sky, I finally spoke. "Do you ever think this storm is trying to tell us something?" Ethan gave a small laugh, the kind that sounds like it hurts a little. "Maybe it's warning us," he said. "Or maybe it's washing everything clean." His words hung in the air. I could feel the electricity. Not just from the lightning, but from us, like the space between our breaths was too small to stay empty. Then, before I could think, he stepped closer. His voice dropped low. I don't know how to stop thinking about you, Daniel. My chest tightened. Then don't. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. The rain, the thunder, the doubts all faded. Ethan leaned forward until his forehead rested against mine. His breath trembled, his body warm even through the cold air. I shouldn't, he whispered. But you already did, I said quietly. He pulled back slightly, his eyes filled with conflict. You don't understand what this means. If anyone finds out, if the church board— Ethan, I interrupted, I'm not asking you to choose between me and your faith. I just want you to be honest, with me and with yourself, he sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. Honesty's never been this dangerous, I smiled faintly. Maybe it's the only kind worth having. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, but instead he opened the door. I should drive you home before the roads flood. The car ride was silent, except for the sound of rain hitting the windshield. I watched the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, the muscle in his jaw tightening whenever he looked out into the dark. When we reached my driveway, he stopped but didn't turn off the engine. Thanks, I said softly, my hand on the door handle. He hesitated. Daniel, about what happened in there— I know, I said. You don't have to explain. He looked relieved but sad. I'll see you Sunday. Maybe, I answered. And before he could reply, I stepped out into the rain. That week I couldn't stop thinking about him. I kept replaying every second. The way his voice cracked when he said my name, the way his forehead had pressed against mine, trembling between faith and desire. I tried to distract myself, but even when I worked, even when I slept, I saw his face. By Saturday, I gave up pretending. I went to the church, late in the afternoon, when I knew the place would be quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like it. Inside, the pews were empty. The candles flickered weakly, their flames tired but stubborn. Ethan was there arranging hymn books at the altar. He looked surprised when he saw me. Daniel, I needed to see you, I said, my voice shaking more than I expected. He set the books down and came closer. I told myself you wouldn't come. I told myself the same thing. We both laughed softly, the tension easing for a second. But it didn't last. I took a step closer and my voice lowered. Ethan, I can't keep pretending this doesn't mean something. His jaw tightened again, that same look of inner battle crossing his face. It does mean something, he said finally. That's the problem. Why is that a problem? Because if I let it be real, he said, I'll have to admit I've been living a lie. Everything I've built, this church, this life, it's all built on me being someone I'm not. I felt my heart twist. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding. He looked away. You think it's that simple? No, I said, but I think it's necessary. He turned toward the stained glass window, where the last light of the sun painted colors across his face. Red, blue, gold. He looked like a man split between heaven and earth. Daniel, he said softly, you don't know what it's like to be trapped by your own promises. I've spent years trying to convince myself that I could suppress this part of me, that I could pray it away. I stepped forward until I was just a breath away from him. You can't pray away what's real. He looked at me and something in him broke. His eyes glistened, and for the first time I saw tears. Do you think God hates me for feeling this way? I shook my head. No, I think he's the one who sent me to you. He laughed through the tears, shaking his head. You always say the things I'm too afraid to believe. Then start believing them. The room went silent again. He reached up and brushed a tear from his cheek, his hand trembling slightly. Then, almost without thinking, he touched my face. His fingers lingered there, warm and careful. Every time I look at you, he said, his voice low, I feel peace and panic at the same time. I smiled faintly. Maybe that's what love feels like. He froze at the word, like it scared him. Then he whispered, if it is, it's the most terrifying thing I've ever known. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the windows. The last of the light faded, and the church fell into shadows. He didn't pull away. I didn't either. Our foreheads touched again, just like that night in the chapel. The air between us felt sacred, not like breaking a rule, but like breaking free, and then softly he said, if anyone finds out, they'll destroy me, I whispered back. Then we'll keep it between us for now. He hesitated, eyes full of fear and longing. "For now," he repeated. That night I drove home with my heart pounding, knowing that whatever we had started couldn't stay hidden forever. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care, because somewhere in that storm of faith and fear, I'd found something worth risking everything for, and I had a feeling Ethan had too. Sunday came faster than I wanted. I didn't sleep much the night before. My thoughts were a restless mix of guilt, excitement, and fear, like I was standing at the edge of something too deep to see the bottom. When morning light filtered through my window, I almost convinced myself not to go to church. Almost. But something inside me needed to see him again. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was faith in disguise. When I arrived, the parking lot was full. Families were greeting each other with smiles, kids running between cars, the sound of hymns spilling faintly from the open doors. Everything felt so normal, except for me. I slipped inside quietly, taking a seat in the back row. Ethan was already at the pulpit, his hands resting on the worn wood, his Bible open. When he saw me, his voice faltered for just a second before he continued reading. Only I noticed. That single hesitation felt like a whisper only I could hear. He spoke about forgiveness that day, about how sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. His voice trembled once or twice, and I knew he wasn't just preaching, he was confessing in his own way. The congregation listened, unaware of the war behind his calm expression. When the service ended, I stayed in my seat, waiting for the church to empty. I watched him shake hands, smile, thank people for coming. He was the same Ethan everyone admired, steady, kind, good. But I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of something he was trying to carry alone. When the last person left, he turned toward me. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Neither should you," I replied. He sighed and motioned for me to follow him. We walked down a narrow hallway behind the sanctuary, past offices and storage rooms, until we reached a small side door that opened into the garden. It was quiet there. Just the sound of birds and the soft rustle of the wind through the leaves. "I meant what I said last night," he began, his voice low. "If anyone finds out," I interrupted gently. "Ethan, I'm not here to expose you. I just needed to see you, to know you didn't regret it." He looked down, his thumb tracing the edge of his Bible. "Regret? No fear? Absolutely." I stepped closer, my voice calm. "Then maybe we can figure out how to live with both." He looked up, eyes searching mine. "You make it sound easy. It's not. But neither is pretending you don't feel anything." He looked away, toward the church. "You don't understand what this place means to me. It's not just a job, Daniel. It's my purpose, my life. And yet every time I see you, I feel like that purpose changes shape." I swallowed hard. "Maybe your purpose isn't what you thought it was." That made him smile, a small, sad smile. "You always know how to say things that make me question everything. Maybe that's why you need me," I said quietly. He froze at that, his eyes locking on mine. For a moment, the air grew still, heavy with all the words we weren't saying. Then a sudden sound broke it, a woman's voice calling his name from inside the building. He stepped back instantly, his whole demeanor changing. "Ethan, are you out here?" It was Linda, one of the choir directors. I recognized her voice. He looked panicked. "Go," he whispered. "Please," I hesitated, but his eyes pleaded with me. So I slipped around the corner, hiding behind a hedge just as Linda appeared at the door. "There you are," she said. "We're short on volunteers for next weekend's charity event. Can you help organize the setup?" Ethan forced a smile. "Of course, Linda. I'll take care of it." They talked for another minute before she left. When she was gone, he let out a shaky breath and leaned against the wall. I stepped out from behind the hedge. "See?" I said softly. "You shouldn't have to live like that, afraid someone might see you just talking to me." He didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, "I know. But fear is all I've known for so long." I took a step closer. "Then maybe it's time to feel something else." He looked at me, his eyes raw, vulnerable. "And what if that something destroys everything I've built? Then maybe it's worth rebuilding." He didn't speak again. He just stared at me for what felt like forever, before finally saying, "Meet me here tomorrow night." After dark, please. When I nodded, he looked almost relieved. The next evening, I came back. The church was dark, its stained glass windows glowing faintly from the streetlights outside. The garden was quiet, just like before. Ethan was already there, leaning against the railing, his coat draped over his shoulders. When he saw me, his expression softened. "You came," he said quietly. "I said I would." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything. About us." I waited, heart pounding. "I've lived my whole life telling other people how to love, how to be good, how to follow the path of righteousness," he said. "And now, I don't even know what that path is anymore. Maybe it's not a path," I said softly. "Maybe it's a person." He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw peace, not complete but real. He stepped closer until our hands brushed. "If this is wrong," he whispered, "then I don't want to be right anymore." I smiled faintly. "Then don't." He took my hand fully, fingers intertwining with mine. The world around us faded, the cold, the dark, the fear. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "Neither do I admitted. "But maybe that's the point." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, low and distant, like the echo of a heartbeat. He squeezed my hand, eyes glistening. "Tomorrow, I'll still be the pastor. You'll still be the new guy in the back row. But tonight, I finished for him, we can just be us." He smiled through the tears, the kind of smile that breaks and heals at the same time. And as the first drops of rain began to fall again, he whispered, "Then let it rain." We didn't move. We didn't need to, because for the first time there was no hiding, no pretending. Just two souls standing in the rain, finally brave enough to exist. The next morning, I woke up with the sound of rain still echoing in my mind. Every drop that had fallen the night before felt like it had washed something away. My fear, his guilt, maybe even the invisible wall that separated us. Yet as the sunlight crept through my window, the reality of what we'd done began to settle in. Ethan was a pastor. I was someone the church barely knew. And what we'd shared, however real and pure it felt, was something the world around us would never understand. I spent most of the morning pacing around my apartment, replaying the night over and over. The way his hand had trembled when it touched mine. The way his eyes had softened like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally exhaled. I didn't know what that moment meant for him, or for me. But I knew it had changed something inside both of us. When my phone buzzed around noon, my heart stopped. A message from Ethan: "Meet me at the church garden. 7 p.m., please." No explanation. Just that. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling both nervous and drawn in, like I had no choice but to go. All day I couldn't focus on anything else. My mind wandered between hope and fear, between the possibility that he wanted to see me again, and the dread that maybe he wanted to end whatever had begun between us. When the time came, I drove through the quiet evening streets toward the church. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue across the rooftops. And by the time I arrived, the world was fading into twilight. Ethan was waiting in the garden, sitting on the same bench where we'd stood in the rain. He looked different. Tired, tense, but somehow calmer too. "Hey," I said softly, walking toward him. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You came?" "Of course," I said. "You asked me to." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I wasn't sure you would after last night." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But not because I regret it." He looked up sharply at that, his eyes searching mine. "Then why?" "Because I know you," I said. "And I know how hard you're fighting yourself right now." He took a long breath, as if my words had hit a truth he couldn't deny. "You're right," he said quietly. "All day I've been thinking about what happened, about how it felt, about what it means. And the truth is, I don't know how to fit this into my world." I sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth in the cool evening air. "Maybe it's not supposed to fit," I said. "Maybe it's supposed to make you rebuild your world differently." He let out a faint, broken laugh. "You make everything sound so simple." "I'm not saying it's simple," I replied. "I'm saying it's real. And real things rarely fit neatly into the boxes people expect them to. He turned toward me, his face illuminated by the fading light. "Do you know what's ironic?" he said. "I've spent my whole life preaching about love, about how it's patient, kind, enduring, but I never understood how terrifying it is when it's actually yours." I smiled faintly. "That's because real love isn't just about light. Ethan, it's about being willing to walk through darkness with someone." He looked at me for a long time, his eyes filled with emotion he could barely contain. Then he said quietly, "Daniel, I think I'm falling for you." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. My heart stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at him, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "I shouldn't have said that." "Yes," I said quickly, "you should have." He frowned. "You don't understand what that means for me." "Maybe not," I said. "But I know what it means for me. And if we're both standing here, still coming back to the same place, maybe that means something neither of us can keep denying." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "People trust me. They come to me for guidance, for hope. If they ever knew—" "Ethan," I interrupted gently, "the only thing they'd know is that you're human." He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You don't know this town. Being human isn't enough here. You have to be perfect. Then maybe it's time someone showed them that perfection is a lie," I said. "And maybe that someone is you." He was silent for a moment, staring off toward the church, where the faint glow from the stained glass windows shimmered like fading embers. "You make it sound brave," he whispered. "But it feels like ruin, sometimes," I said softly. "You have to let something break before it can become something honest." He turned back to me, and in his eyes I saw something shift, something like surrender. Without another word, he reached out and touched my face. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes didn't waver. I leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his palm, the weight of everything unspoken between us. "Daniel," he said in a low voice, "I've spent years telling people that love is about sacrifice. But I never thought I'd be the one who had to prove it. Maybe love isn't sacrifice," I whispered. "Maybe it's courage." His breath caught, and then slowly he closed the space between us. His lips brushed mine, hesitant at first, then firmer, more certain. It wasn't like the storm last night. This time it was quiet, deliberate, almost reverent. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "What do we do now?" he asked softly. I smiled, my voice trembling just a little. "We keep breathing. We take it one day at a time, and we stop pretending this doesn't matter." He closed his eyes. "I wish I could believe it would be that easy." "It won't be," I admitted. "But nothing worth it ever is." We sat there for a long time, the night growing darker around us until the church lights turned off one by one. For the first time, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. The fear, the longing, the quiet decision to keep holding on, no matter what came next. When he finally stood, he took my hand for just a moment longer than he should have. Then he whispered, "Tomorrow I'll call you." And as he walked away into the night, I realized that whatever this was, confusing, complicated, forbidden, it was also the most honest thing I'd ever felt. I didn't sleep that night. The sound of the wind outside my window felt heavier than usual, as if it carried all the weight of what had just happened. Ethan's words replayed in my mind like a confession I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. "I think I'm falling for you." And yet, beneath the warmth of that truth there was fear. Cold, paralyzing fear. He was a pastor. He was the newcomer everyone in church politely smiled at, but didn't truly know. What we had wasn't supposed to happen, at least not in the world we lived in. But sometimes love doesn't care about rules. Sometimes it just arrives quietly and refuses to leave. The next day, I waited for his call like someone waiting for a heartbeat. The minutes stretched into hours, and each silence made the doubt grow louder. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe the weight of his position had crushed what little courage he'd found last night. By evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my jacket, got into my car, and drove to the church. The parking lot was empty. The sanctuary lights were off, except for one faint glow inside the pastor's office. My heart raced as I walked toward it. Through the window, I saw him sitting at his desk, head in his hands. Papers were scattered everywhere, and his Bible lay open beside him. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel his turmoil. When he finally looked up, his eyes found mine through the glass. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly he stood and opened the door. "Daniel," he said, his voice low and tired. "I was just about to call you." "Were you?" I asked, stepping inside. He gave a small, sad smile. "Yes, but I didn't know what to say." "Then start with the truth," I said. "Whatever it is," he took a deep breath. "The truth is, I've never been more afraid of something that feels this right. I woke up this morning and thought, what have I done? But the moment I imagined never seeing you again, I couldn't breathe. I felt something inside me soften." "Then maybe that's your answer." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. There are people who look up to me, families who trust me. If they ever found out..." I cut him off gently. "Ethan, do you really think hiding who you are makes you a better leader? Or just a lonelier one?" He didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to the window, staring out into the dark. "You don't understand. Everything I've built could disappear." "Maybe it should," I said quietly. "If it's built on denying who you really are." He turned to face me, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. "You make it sound so easy, but I've spent my whole life fighting against this. Part of me." I took a step closer. "Then stop fighting. Let it exist. Let us exist." For a moment the air between us felt electric, like the storm that had brought us together that first night. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something in his face had changed. He looked raw, unguarded. "Do you love me?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard, but the answer came easily. "Yes, I think I do." He exhaled shakily. "Then say it again." "I love you, Ethan." He swallowed hard, as if the words both healed and hurt him at once. "I needed to hear that," he said, "because I love you too. And that terrifies me." We stood there in silence, two men on opposite sides of everything they'd been taught, yet somehow perfectly aligned in that moment. He walked closer until our foreheads touched. "If I choose this," he whispered, "I lose everything else." "Maybe," I said softly, "but you gain something real." He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. "You don't know what it's like to live under expectations so heavy you forget how to breathe." I nodded. "No, but I know what it's like to watch someone drown in them. That broke something inside him." He pulled me into his arms and held me tight, like a man who had finally stopped running. I could feel his heartbeat pounding against my chest, frantic and desperate. For the first time, it wasn't just about fear, it was about release. After a long silence, he said, "I can't keep hiding, Daniel. Not from them, not from God, not from myself." I looked up at him, my voice trembling. "Then what are you going to do?" He smiled faintly. "Tell the truth." The next Sunday, I sat in the very back of the church, heart hammering in my chest. Ethan walked to the pulpit, his expression calm but resolute. The congregation quieted, waiting for his sermon. He didn't open his Bible. He didn't look at his notes. He just looked at the people who'd trusted him for years and said, "I need to speak to you from my heart." A hush fell over the room. "I've spent my life teaching about love, God's love, human love, unconditional love," he said, his voice steady. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot that love isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to be lived. And lately I've realized that I haven't been honest with you, or with myself." A murmur spread through the crowd. Ethan took a breath, and his eyes found mine across the room. "I've fallen in love," he continued, "and it's not with who you might expect. But it's real, it's pure, and I can't pretend it's wrong anymore." Gasps echoed through the church. Some people stood, others whispered, but he didn't flinch. "I understand if this changes how you see me," he said, "but I'd rather be seen for who I truly am than worshipped for who I'm not." Tears blurred my vision as I watched him step down from the pulpit. When our eyes met again, he smiled, a quiet, trembling smile that told me everything was going to be different now. He walked straight toward me, ignoring the murmurs and the stares. When he reached the back of the room, he extended his hand. "Let's go," he said simply. I took it. As we walked out together into the morning light, I realized something profound. Love doesn't always wait for permission. Sometimes it demands courage instead. And in that moment, hand in hand with him, I knew we'd both found ours, because love, real love, doesn't ruin you. It rebuilds you. And that was the day we both finally began to live.